Hey guys, it's me, Jack24 here, and today I'm going to be reacting to OverSimplified the American Civil War Part 2. Part 2. And in case you don't know, this is my second attempt making this video. First attempt I was sort of bugged out by Moo and Mur. Isn't that right, Murray? Yes, go, be comfy on my bed. Go be there, merman. Yes, sir. Sorry, dogs. I love them all very much. And pretty much now, all the copyright belongs to OverSimplified, and all the music rights belongs to their respective owners. Anyways, let's begin this reaction, no doubt in less. Alright. So pretty much he's just saying that this video is sponsored by Honey.
How you can save money when you shop online. As the Union struggle to take control in the East continued, elsewhere, the war raged on. The Confederates attempted an invasion of Kentucky, hoping the state as a whole would join them.
And that sort of backfired on them.
They were pushed back. The Indian Territory saw Native American tribes ally with one side or the other in the hopes of securing rights after the war.
That sort of didn't go out, but yet again, I don't know that much about Oklahoma, so that might be a little bit different, but I do know in the Northeast, Native Americans were sort of given a tiny bit of their land back, but not a lot.
On the Mississippi, General Ulysses S. Grant remained one of the few Union generals scoring major victories. With his best pal, General Sherman, by his side, Grant led his armies down the Mississippi to the Confederate stronghold of Vicksburg. Both sides knew that if Vicksburg fell, the Confederacy would be split in two, and the Confederates prepared for an intense defense of the city. But back in the East, Lincoln still wanted somebody to march south and take Richmond. Having given General McClellan the boot, he needed a new man in charge. All right, Mr. President. Option 1 is General Hooker. Bit of a nutcase, but a good general. Option 2, his qualifications are his name is Burnside.
Oh my goodness. Is this how sideburns got their name? I'm not gonna lie, that sort of looks like that.
Freaking dope-ass sideburns. Say no more. So General Burnside was put in charge of the Army of the Potomac and sent south. Lincoln hoped he finally had a general who could succeed. Burnside met General Lee at the city of Fredericksburg, where he intended to rapidly cross the river and take the city. But the Union War Department was too slow in delivering the pontoon bridges, and the two sides were forced to camp across from each other, close.
But they could have at least had a shootout or something. Like, I know back then they switched from muskets to rifles. I mean, this is after the Napoleonic War, after all. So yeah, they definitely had rifles at that time. And also, this part's going to be playing on something funny, but I pretty much about what beliefs were going on around that time.
To speak. Hey, Yankee, ready to get your butt kicked? Yeah, right, rebel. God is on our side. No way, God's on our side.
I say God's on no one's side, since, once again, as you guys should know, or if this is the first time you're watching me, then pretty much I'm just saying, God, I'm an atheist. Like, I don't believe in God, I believe in people's beliefs in religion, but I honestly do not believe in God.
You think so? Well, why don't we ask him? Hey, God, whose side are you on? Ow.
That should definitely be what happens.
Dude, uncool. With over 100,000 men, the Union Army finally launched their massive attack on the 11th of December. But by now, the Confederates had amassed their forces. During the battle, wave after wave of brave Union men marched headlong into a brutal Confederate onslaught. Even the Confederates couldn't believe what they were seeing, and in one moment of camaraderie, a Confederate sergeant, unable to take it, reportedly came out into the field to tend to the Union wounded.
Now that is oddly dedicated human emotions that you're not supposed to show in war. This is one of the few cases where the battle actually stops for a while, and peace would be made while it's not. I mean, this is what happened during the Christmas truce of World War One, and the only real German to actually oppose that was, unfortunately, the worst German that ever lived. The worst Austrian German that ever lived. Mr. Adolf Hitler. Not a nice guy, definitely racist, and not a good guy. He opposed the peace of World War One, and yeah, that didn't work out well. We all know what happened afterwards, which World War Two oversimplified would be coming soon. Would be coming soon, but you need to wait for a bit.
Seeing this, the Union troops held their fire. Still, Burnside and his forces were soundly defeated at Fredericksburg and forced to retreat. Lincoln's popularity and Northern morale continued to plummet, especially as the winter heading into 1863 was bad. The winter camps were rife with disease. The food was less than appealing.
Look, it's Spaghetti Jeff from the War of the Bucket. I'll get on to that later, but for now, you guys are just left in confusion on how I know him. You would know that later.
On both sides, men began to leave. Hey, where do you think you're going? I'm deserting. What? Don't you love your country? Yes, I do. And I'm trying to get back to it as quick as I can. Lincoln, ever the kind and caring man he was, spent much of his time pardoning deserters' death sentences. Oh my. Here's a 17-year-old boy sentenced to be hanged. Well, I'd better suspend his sentence. Or he'll be suspended tomorrow.
Yeah, I have to agree with them. That bad joke. Sorry, just showing on a piece of gum. Wait, why isn't this playing? Oh, that's right, I forgot it. Spacebar.
What? To try to keep the numbers up, both sides had introduced conscription. There was controversy in the North, however, since rich men could simply pay to have someone else fight on their behalf. Riots broke out in New York City with enraged mobs.
Wait, that says Pug's Tony Pizza. I don't think they had pizza back then. I mean, they could have, but I'm pretty sure this is not when the Italians came over. I'm pretty sure that the Italians did came over for during this time. Or it could be later. You can correct me if I'm wrong or right or wrong on that in the comments down below.
Furious at the idea of going to fight for slaves, an idea that many of them simply did not support. However, after so much pressure, the Union had finally begun allowing black men to enlist, and these men, knowing what they were fighting for, signed up. By the end of the war, nearly 200,000 troops, 10% of the Union Army, would be black. The valor and bravery they showed throughout, silencing critics. Okay, well that last guy was useless. Let's try this Hooker fellow. General Joseph Hooker was put in charge of the Army of the Potomac, and once again, Lincoln ordered him to move south and take Richmond.
Hopefully, Hooker would actually succeed, but we wouldn't know that.
At Lee at the Battle of Chancellorsville, where Hooker had over twice the men Lee did. Lee was forced to defy all military convention and split his smaller force.
Alright, so pretty much what happens here is that the Confederates sort of beats the Unions, but very fast. Watch this, and it would explain.
To 2. Lee had absolutely no chance of winning, and Lee won. It was his masterpiece. Lee did suffer one significant loss during the battle, though. As his right-hand man, Stonewall Jackson, was riding back to the Confederate lines at night, the nervous Confederate troops, unable to recognize him, opened fire.
Yeah, I did hear about this from the other time I made a video, and before that, I pretty much did know that pretty much that Jackson did die around that battle. I'm not sure like how exactly he died. I did hear that he was shot, but I didn't know that it was friendly fire by his own soldiers. All I knew before was soldiers shot him at night, and that's how he died.
You boys done goofed up. Jackson died 8 days later. As for Lincoln, he couldn't believe it. It was yet another loss, and Northern support continued to waver. While the Union kept on struggling in the East, out west, unconditional surrender Grant was making moves as always. In an attempt to take Vicksburg on the Mississippi, he made a series of risky and bold movements. He sent a cavalry raid and feigned Sherman north to confuse the enemy. Then, Aided by a fleet of ironclads on the river, he raced his army south to cross the Mississippi.
And now watch this. He's gonna prove to you guys why. This is gonna prove his statement on how he was a good general. Just watch, listen, and learn. I'm gonna be quiet for a few minutes, or about a good minute or so. But you guys would have to understand on what separates him from other generals. I am gonna literally go back and explain it.
Aware that the terrain to the north was restrictive, instead, he strategically moved northeast, hitting Vicksburg's supply line and defending his rear from Confederate armies in Jackson. Once he reached Vicksburg, the Confederate defense became hardened, and Grant was forced to...
Alright, so pretty much as you just saw it, he just won that in a matter of days. I'm not going to say that's been a week. I'm just saying that's been like about a day.
Fleet of ironclads on the river, he raced his army south to cross the Mississippi.
Look here. He knows that an easy way to flank the enemy is either A, go around him, or B, literally go right behind him. So he's going right below them, just so he can get right behind them. And since they're all confused due to his great confusing battle strategies to mainly just distract the enemy, he's able to
Aware that the terrain to the north was restrictive, instead, he strategically moved...
And now watch this. As he knows that he goes northwest due to the landscape not being right for soldiers, and unlike most people, he goes and destroys the supply line, which honestly is a good thing to do, because if you have no supplies, you can't run an army.
Northeast, hitting Vicksburg's
And also, he goes right here into Jackson, and he kicks Johnson out so that way there will be no reinforcements to help out Vicksburg.
And defending his rear from Confederate armies in Jackson. Once he reached Vicksburg, the Confederate defense became hardened, and Grant was forced to settle in for a month-long siege, during which time he got rather bored.
And once again, I might want to place this out. He was not a heavy drinker on whiskey or anything. Like, in fact, he didn't really drink that much whiskey. So yeah, he just got stuck with that somehow.
Despite not taking the city, Lincoln loved it and encouraged Grant to hold firm. It would only be a matter of time before the Mississippi was in Union hands. Around this time, the people in the west of Virginia, who had remained loyal to the Union throughout, finally broke away to form their own state. They could have named it anything in the world, but
I like West Virginia the most, but for the name now, Canada 2's pretty much just Vermont. Like, I'll explain on that more later, but I mean, several of the old states that broke away sort of were their own countries, but mainly they were like in this case of Vermont, it pretty much was a part of New York, but then it just was able to get independence. It was able to become its own state. The original plan for it was to actually become a part of Canada, but then due to people more being Americanized, they just offered to be more of a state.
Creative minds at the time came up with the ingenious West Virginia. Back in Washington, Lincoln once again wanted a new general to take command. Oh my goodness, why do all these 19th century generals look so bust? Look, we got Sleepy Eyes Joe here. That's Princess Leia with a mustache. E.T. phoned the doctor. Fine, why don't we give Snapping Turtle McGee here a shot?
He's not wrong about those names.
General Snapping Turtle McGee was put in charge of the Army of the Potomac, and it was a crucial time for the Union, because once again
we're entering the Battle of Gettysburg.
The Confederates decided to go on the attack. So far, they had done exceedingly well militarily, but as the war kept going, the Confederate economy was crumbling. Riots...
Hold on, let me see. What did that sign say? Just give me a second.
So far.
Alright, so obviously the first start is then you say we have a military, then we say some military project, then you say lots of military progress, and then pretty darn good military progress, which honestly is good. But then you need to remember that if you don't have a good economy, and then if your people are literally weakened, then pretty much it goes down.
They had done exceedingly well militarily, but as the war kept going, the Confederate economy was
Mucho grande economic economic downturn. Yeah, that's not good. And yeah, and pretty much once the economic downturn starts, that means you either have to get out the naval blockade, okay, to either sell your stuff, or either B, if you just sell stuff, pretty much you're going to just be destroyed.
rumbling. Riots broke out in the streets of Richmond as the price of bread skyrocketed. Supplies were dwindling.
Oh no, they're using broomsticks. Alright, this ain't good.
Wanted to send men west to rescue Vicksburg, but General Lee knew the longer the war lasted, the worse their chances got, and he still hoped if he could just threaten D.C., the already demoralized North would surrender. So in June 1863, with the momentum behind him, General Lee once again entered the North, fighting his way through Maryland and into Pennsylvania. General Meade set out to meet him for what would be the most significant battle of the entire war. If the Confederates won, D.C. could fall. If the Union won, it would be a turning point, as the Confederates would run out of steam, and the small town that was to get caught up in the crossfire of the largest battle in American history was Gettysburg, Pennsylvania.
It's not a surprise if you're an American, but it is if you're from somewhere else besides Canada or Mexico. Yeah, it could be something different for Mexico, but no wait, yeah, this they have Cinco de Mayo. That was more of a holiday for them. I'll explain more on that on Cinco de Mayo.
On June 1st, units from each army encountered one another and skirmished through the town itself. The townspeople were forced to take refuge, except for one man, who reportedly ran outside for a strange reason. "Joseph, what are you doing?" "I'm not gonna let them take my beans."
They're not after your beans. Beans, man. They're after the Confederates. No, wait, not the Confederates. I mean the Union. The Union Army.
"How many times do I have to tell you, they're not here for your beans?" By the second day, over 100,000 men stretched for miles across the battlefield. Lee took the initiative, deciding to hit the enemy's flanks, and
Which is not a bad move in a war. In a war or battle, you always want to hit their flanks. Because, as mentioned in the World War One OverSimplified video, if there's a gap in your line, then the enemy's got a better chance on flanking you and killing you. And this is a big turning point, as all the flanks actually held up, surprisingly.
Close to breaking through the Union's disorganized left, but Union Colonel Joshua Chamberlain ordered a desperate bayonet charge.
See, what changed this around was the desperate bayonet charge. I actually heard more about this. Was that the Union, that part of the Union section actually ran out of ammo, and in a desperate last minute chance to get the Confederates away, they used bayonets and did a direct charge, so that way they can use whatever little ammunition left as possible, so they can save it for the next day. Which this one really turned the tide around for one reason. You're going to be saying why in a second.
Mashing into the Confederates and forcing them back. The Union forces held across the line. On the final day, Lee believed the Union Army had fortified its flanks, so he decided to finish them off with one massive central assault. The Confederates rushed at the Union lines during General Pickett's charge, and this time, it was the Union's turn to unleash hell. Meade had correctly guessed Lee's strategy, and the Confederates were decimated, forced to turn and flee. A devastated General Lee called out to his fleeing and wounded men, telling them it was his fault. And after holding...
To be fair, I mean, how many generals do you know that are willing to make up that they know when that they made a mistake? I mean that really was a good move militarily, but at the same time, if you already certified the flanks, flanks, then you pretty much should guess what you're going for.
For a counterattack that never came, he ordered a retreat back into Virginia. The North had just managed to score a massive victory, and one they desperately needed. And if that wasn't enough, in the West, after a month-long siege, Vicksburg finally fell. The North now held the Mississippi. And better yet, it was the 4th of July. With control of the Mississippi, Union forces moved into Arkansas and Tennessee. Tennessee in particular saw heavy fighting, with Union General Rosecrans masterfully pushing Braxton Bragg's Army of the Tennessee out of Tennessee. He suffered a major setback, however, at the bloody Battle of Chickamauga, and ended up under a Confederate siege at Chattanooga. At one point during the siege, a temporary truce was declared so that wounded men could be recovered. And often in the Civil War, during these small truces, men from both sides would meet in the middle to trade things like tobacco, coffee, and maybe even honey.
So pretty much he's just going to use his advertisement right here, which is him about explaining what honey is, and I'm not really going to get into that. Once again, all the copyright does belong to him, so sorry about this, OverSimplified, but I'm going to skip your ad this time.
Joinhoney.com/oversimplified. And as always, you'll be supporting my channel, so thank you. Now where was I? Oh yeah, Vicksburg, 4th of July, and the Siege of Chattanooga. Thankfully, General Grant, now in charge of all Western Union armies, showed up and karate-kicked Bragg right back into Georgia. Like this. With Sherman...
That seems sort of possible, but I'm not going to question the logic.
Hooker, Grant took on Confederate positions in the mountains around the city, including the famous battle above the clouds and Mission Ridge. Grant continued to be Lincoln's #1 guy. With these victories, Lincoln hoped the war was finally turning. Back in Gettysburg, the entire town had been turned into a hospital to care for the scores of wounded men. Throughout the war, on both sides, women such as Clara Barton rose to the occasion, doing crucial work on the home front and volunteering as nurses for those who had given their lives. A new national cemetery was to be established at Gettysburg, and Abraham Lincoln traveled out to attend the opening ceremony. At the event, the main speaker spoke for 2 hours. Then, Abraham Lincoln was called forward to give some brief, appropriate remarks. In just 2 minutes, he masterfully...
Let me read this real quick. 7 years ago, our fathers brought upon forth
national purpose and the need
on this continent a new nation.
Continue the fight.
They conceived in liberty and decided...
Gettysburg Address would become one of the most famous speeches in American history. While they were now making progress, the North still couldn't find a decisive victory in the East. And that was bad news for Lincoln, because his presidency was now in its 4th year. In 1864, there was an election coming. The Confederates knew this too, and with little hope left of being able to threaten the North militarily, they believed their last shot at victory may be in the election, since Lincoln, emancipation, and the war itself weren't exactly popular. People in the North were sick of war and wanted to put it behind them. Robert E. Lee hoped that if he could just hold out and continue to inflict more defeats, the people of the North would vote Lincoln out and replace him with a Southern sympathizer who may be willing to negotiate.
Alright, so pretty much willing to try and negotiate to peace. That's not a bad option, but what I'm saying is that you might want to try and do a more of a better invasion. And for Lincoln, he needed something large in order to stay as president. Otherwise, he's going to be kicked out. Down and presidents are not going to be well.
Lincoln knew now he desperately needed a victory. Now, I know what you're thinking, but oversimplified. If Lincoln loves General Grant so much, then why doesn't he put him in charge of the campaign in the East?
And guess what happens? He gets put in charge.
Guess what, loyal subscriber? You've hit the nail on the head. You're bold, Grant. I'll grant you that. I'm promoting you to General-in-Chief, and I ain't taking you for granted. Now I want you to go defeat Lee. Grant me my wish. Please stop. So Grant was put...
Grant's not wrong.
...charge, and he came up with a new plan. He wanted to press the Confederates on all fronts, with General Banks to capture Mobile, Alabama, General Sherman moving south to Atlanta.
Alright, so let's just go back here.
With General Banks to capture Mobile...
So it was actually planned for him to go there, but he actually went further up Louisiana, which it sort of makes more sense, but if you look here, that it makes more sense for trying to invade, but he actually went there.
General Sherman moving south to Atlanta, and Grant joining the Army of the Potomac as they advanced through Virginia. In May 1864, that plan went into action. Sherman steadily advanced on Atlanta, facing off against the smaller Confederate army under General Joseph E. Johnston. In addition, a cruel yet highly skilled cavalry general and winner of the funniest Confederate statue award, Nathan Bedford Forrest, was also nearby, doing his best to threaten Sherman's advance. But in a series of battles, Sherman dominated and pushed Johnson back to the city. But he was held just outside of Atlanta itself and was forced to lay siege. Meanwhile, the main show was happening to the east in Virginia. The Union's top general was finally about to face off against the Confederacies. Lincoln hoped Grant would bring something new to the Eastern Theater, and bring something new he did. As Grant began moving south, Lee still regularly outmaneuvered him and inflicted heavy casualties, hoping to demoralize the North as much as he could. But here's what set Grant apart from others. He knew Lee was running out of men, and that the North by comparison had plenty. Grant would...
This is pretty much the determination of Grant, and you're going to know why. Well, he does have another popular name during the Civil War. He's known as Grant the Butcher, and you're about to see why he's called the Butcher.
Throw his forces at Lee, and even when Lee repelled them, Grant, rather than pulling back, would give the order to keep moving forward and flank Lee, again and again. In under 6 weeks, 80,000 men would be killed, wounded, or missing. In D.C., Grant was criticized for being a butcher. At the Battle of the Wilderness, the Union casualties were so heavy that Grant reportedly began to weep. But
And if you know that if your top general starts to weep, then you know that's pretty much a lot of casualties then. Oh yeah, and I just noticed that there's some bottles of moonshine in the background.
Grant could replace his losses. Lee couldn't, and he was being pushed all the way back to Richmond. Lee knew once he got there, he'd be under siege. Then it would only be a matter of time. Close to Richmond, Grant again suffered horrific casualties in a miscalculated assault at Cold Harbor. Then, trying to be a trickster, instead of moving on Richmond directly, Grant moved towards Petersburg to flank the Confederate capital and cut its supply line. But, just like Sherman, Grant was halted outside of the city, and he too was forced to settle in for a siege. 2 identical sieges would not be good enough for Lincoln's re-election. The people of the North saw the casualties Grant had been taking, and they weren't happy. To make matters worse, Lee had sent Jubal Early north to threaten D.C., with the hope of forcing Grant to withdraw troops from Richmond. Early was repelled on the outskirts of the city, with President Lincoln even attending as an observer, but the North had...
Look at it. Back for a second. If you look here...
2 identical sieges would not be good enough for Lincoln's re-election. The people of the
North
saw the casualties Grant had been taking, and they weren't happy. To make matters worse, Lee had sent Jubal Early north to threaten D.C., with the hope of forcing Grant to withdraw troops from Richmond. Early was repelled on the outskirts of...
See, look here. If you have a president, like, watching your fight, then you know, that ain't good.
City, with President Lincoln even attending as an observer, but the North had been given a fright. So with the...
And, actually, during several times, I hear that the Confederates will try to send Lincoln more assassination attempts. They tried sending him clothes infected with yellow fever. Thankfully, he did not receive that. Like, there's reportedly one person that was trying to stab him late at night, but that failed. They'll all get more into that later.
Currently in a stalemate, who was to be Lincoln's opponent in the critical 1864 election?
Oh, wait. 1864 presidential election sponsored by Uncle Joe's Snake Oil Emporium. Alright, yeah, they're not wrong. America does with oil. Half of it does, at least. And that's either mainly the military and half of the population.
Who would the Democrats choose? Guess what, baby? I'm back. That's right.
Oh no, it's not that guy. It's not McClellan, who clearly failed. Hold on, if you excuse me for a moment.
General George B. McClellan would run for president against Abraham Lincoln. My fellow countrymen, if you elect me, I, the great General George McClellan, will fearlessly and valiantly win the war.
Alright, I'm just going to mute this real quick.
Unlike the Democrats, however.
Yeah, sorry about that. Well, it's just that word is a very bad word, and once again, this is a kid friendly but yet still teenage channel, so I'm pretty much easing, as you guys know, I'm pretty much the person who eases you out of swearing and more into calmer swears.
Including McClellan's running mate, wanted to end the war, so it's possible McClellan may have ended up fearlessly and valiantly making peace with the Confederates, which is exactly what they were hoping for. With the war in a stalemate and Lincoln still not popular, it looked like McClellan would win, and the Confederacy may have a chance at surviving after all. Lincoln himself said that without some kind of major victory, it seemed exceedingly probable that this administration will not be re-elected. Well, fret not, Abe, because if it's a major victory you want, it's a major victory you'll get.
Atlanta fallen.
Hi. Got a small favor to ask of you.
No, I'm not supporting you, you socialist. You literally did this in the last video.
Please add your name to say.
No, you're just gonna ruin the economy. You're literally falling like that. Even Howard Stern's calling you Karl Marx Jr. And we all know what happened with the original Karl Marx. He pretty much was the guy who invented communism, and that stuff didn't end well. I mean, did you even see what it turned Russia into, and what bad effects it had on?
Support our campaign.
No.
Atlanta had been under siege by General Sherman for just over a month. After a number of battles around the city, Sherman sent a force south to sever the city's supply line, and Confederate General Hood was forced to abandon it. Atlanta, one of the Confederacy's most important cities, had fallen into Union hands. For many, it was clear that the Confederacy's defeat was now inevitable, and the war would soon be over. When the final results came in, Lincoln had won with an electoral college landslide.
Oh yeah, that is. Let's go back to the note to the
Amen.
things here.
Lincoln had won with an.
All right, so that is pretty much, if you think about it, this is before America really actually got. Wait, when was Alaska and Hawaii purchased? Pretty much, I knew that they're pretty much, if you think about it, this is about 91.63. That is pretty much about half. Not half. That is around more than 90% of a nation. I mean, McClellan now is just looking like very small compared to Lincoln.
Electoral
And also, fun fact: Lincoln's still the tallest U.S. president to the state.
college landslide, with the troops in particular voting overwhelmingly for Lincoln, which must have been touching for their commander-in-chief. Hey man, looks like you lost. No hard feelings? I didn't lose. I merely failed to win.
That's what the definition of losing is.
In January, Lincoln involved himself heavily in ensuring the 13th Amendment made it through Congress. In a narrow and historic vote, the amendment passed. Slavery would now be constitutionally banished throughout the nation. Black men and women, watching the vote from the galleries, knew the work had only just begun. A couple months later, at his second inauguration,
Look, there's John Wilkes Booth right there.
victory right around the corner, he didn't celebrate, he didn't gloat. Instead, he emphasized the need for reunification and binding up wounds. To him, Americans, North or South, were to again be compatriots. However, listening to Lincoln speak that day was a man who had no interest in reunification, John Wilkes Booth. An actor living in D.C., was also a deep Southern sympathizer, and as the war turned against the Confederacy, depressed and full of hate, he was already plotting his revenge on the man he held responsible. With further Confederate losses, it was pretty clear at this point who would win. But still, Jefferson Davis showed no sign of giving in. The North were frustrated to see the conflict being dragged out. Why waste more lives? In Atlanta, General Sherman believed he had the key to forcing the Confederacy's hand. He had an unusually modern concept, that an army could only survive with the support of the people. Strike at the people, and the army collapses.
Pretty much, that modern concept is one of the smartest things people can think of at the time. I mean, if you think about it, like this is after the Napoleonic Wars which hopefully OverSimplified would get to soon. Which pretty much what I'm saying here is that if you think about it, if you knock out if you knock out a person's people, then a country's people, then they would have no way to support their military. Which, and now you're about to see why it's a good concept.
Sherman decided to do something unprecedented. He would remove his 62,000 men from their supply line and march through the heartland of the Confederacy, where they would live off the land. There, they would wreak havoc. As they marched, they tore up railroads, burned farms, and destroyed communication lines. They also liberated thousands of slaves.
Which is the good thing about that.
The damage done was estimated at $1.4 billion.
That's about in modern day. I mean, that is a lot of damage.
The tactics were cruel, but to Sherman, it was better than losing yet more men in battle. In December, he reached Savannah, Georgia, but he wasn't done yet. Next, he turned north to inflict his punishment on the first state to secede, South Carolina. As he moved, he came ever closer to General Lee's army, still holding out at Petersburg. The siege of Petersburg had lasted for 292 days. 60,000
That is nearly a year.
of Lee's men had deserted. Numerous Union attempts to break through had failed, but when the breakthrough finally came, it came quick. On April 2nd, a Union assault finally pushed the Confederates from their defenses. Hey man, there's no need to evacuate, right? You'll rescue us like last time, right? Sorry, can't hear you.
That's pretty much what happened. I mean, if you think about it, if your capital is about to be attacked, the best thing is to stay in the capital. That always worked out for several people.
Lee narrowly escaped the city, hoping he'd be able to meet up with General Johnson and continue the fight. Grant chased him down. Richmond was evacuated, and Jefferson Davis went on the run. As they left, the Confederates set fire to military buildings, but the flames burned out of control, and as the Union troops arrived, they became firefighters. A couple of days later, Abraham Lincoln visited the war-torn city. Grant caught up to Lee at Appomattox Courthouse, where he trapped his forces.
No, wait, is this where the farmer guy was there before?
Here, on April 9th, 1865, that Lee saw no point in continuing. Sir? Listen, bub, I drank a bit too much last night, and now I'm hanging like a fruit bat on a hot day. So whatever you have to say, I don't want to hear it.
Alright, this seems like the worst time, but if your main enemy's about to surrender, you're going to hear it.
General Lee says he wants to surrender. Hot diggity dog! Grant and Lee met in the home of a nearby farm family, owned by a man who had tried his best to escape the Civil War years earlier, Wilmer McLean. All right, can we all just hurry up and get this over with? Martha, not now!
This is pretty much sort of true.
Cleaning! Do you want us to get rats? Grant and Lee, after years of war, now spoke respectfully to one another. When Lee left, his face filled with emotion, Grant's men began to cheer, but Grant ordered them to stop. He knew that now was the time for reconciliation. Just over 2 weeks later, General Johnson would surrender to Sherman, ending the war for 89,000 Confederate soldiers in the largest surrender of the war. Not every Confederate state had surrendered, but the war was as good as over. Across the North, church bells rang out and celebrations erupted. In Washington, Lincoln gave a speech from the White House to a jubilant crowd, in which, among various things, he expressed his support for black voting rights. Lincoln had seen the nation through its deepest crisis. The presidency had visibly aged him. He had lost over 20 pounds. He said sometimes, I think I am the tiredest man on earth. I'm not sure tiredest is a word, but geez, the man's exhausted. Cut him some slack on a
And yeah, and also, in case if you didn't know, like Lincoln. No, wait, now I remember his assassination attempt. Alright, so the one where he's out alone at night, like riding around on his horse. Like there's a guy who nearly shot him directly in the head. And thank God for Lincoln's hat being taller than his head is. That is because that bullet would have went directly through Lincoln's head, like about an inch before Lincoln's head, about an inch into Lincoln's head, but thank goodness his hat took the worst blow of it.
Ride with Mary, Lincoln clearly was looking forward to being a president in a time of peace. He was apparently very cheerful, surprising his wife, and he told her that between the war and the loss of their son, they'd both been very miserable. Now, it was time to be happy. On the evening of
And so, pretty much, in case of you didn't notice, a small fun fact of Lincoln is that he is the first guy, first president to actually be assassinated, and also he actually saw his own death. Not really. He just more saw like he did report in a journal that was later given to Smithsonian, and that pretty much he was recorded being in the White House, which at the time looked a lot different, and pretty much he recorded hearing like his general in life crying that the president's been shot. And as he goes in, like no one that sees him, and he sees like a body under a cloth, like a blue cloth, and he pretty much opens it up and reveals, in fact, that it's actually him under there. Sort of scares him, but he believes that it's just a realistic dream. And what he did not know was that that was literally a warning to him about what might happen. What might happen.
14th, Lincoln attended a play with his wife and some friends at Ford's Theater. It was a comedy, and the president appeared to be enjoying it very much. In a nearby bar, John Wilkes Booth swallowed 2 glasses of brandy. He slipped quietly into the president's booth and awaited for the audience's laughter to rise. The president was shot in the back of the head. Booth fled the city. Soldiers carried Lincoln to a boarding house across the street. There,
All of a sudden, pretty much, I'm just going to explain what happened here. Is that when John Wilkes Booth shot Lincoln, he also took out a knife and either stabbed Lincoln's wife or one of his general's wife. At this point, I don't remember, but one of his generals did get stabbed. And then Booth supposedly went down on the stage in Downfall of Tyrannus, quoting on what was said once as Julius Caesar was killed off for him being a tyrant.
Declared there was nothing they could do. Surrounded by his heartbroken wife, son, and members of cabinet, at 7:22 the next morning, President Lincoln passed away. Never before had a president been murdered.
Once again, this picture right here, just want to explain it now. There's Theodore Roosevelt, there's his brother. There, clarified. It is confirmed from Smithsonian and Theodore Roosevelt himself that is him and his brother. And literally, future president right there. Get to see, unfortunately gets to see first president assassination. Even though the bull moose survived a bullet shot himself, but it wasn't to the head.
A shocked nation mourned as a 12-day funeral procession carried Lincoln back to his home in Springfield, Illinois. On April 26th, Union cavalry found John Wilkes Booth in a barn in Virginia, where he was shot. Not long after, Confederate President Jefferson Davis was also tracked down and arrested. Imprisoned for 2 years, he was eventually released. The North didn't want to put him on trial for fear the jury may rule that Southern secession had in fact been legal. To ensure reconciliation, other Confederate generals and politicians were allowed to re-enter life in the now restored Union. Scattered fighting continued into May, when the last Confederate forces in Texas disintegrated. The Southern states came under Northern military occupation to prevent any further rebellion, and a very difficult era of Reconstruction began. Over 3 million Americans had fought, brother against brother, the Civil War.
And he's not lying. 2/3 of that would have died from disease. And if you think about it, back then medicine wasn't really that much help, but it was getting better for people.
Means the bloodiest conflict in U.S. history, but the Union had been preserved. You could say the real winners were those who were to never again be slaves. Further amendments passed by Congress gave black individuals the right to citizenship and to vote. Significant progress had been made. However, entering into the 20th century, it was clear the fight for equality would continue. In modern America, The man who fought to preserve the nation and never gave up in the darkest of times stands as a symbol of honesty, empathy, humility, perseverance, and courage. A continuous reminder of what has forged America and what it should ever strive to be.
Yeah, so pretty much that is it. Anyways, if you're new, make sure to leave a like and subscribe down below, and also remember all the copyright belongs to OverSimplified. And anyways, join the Cake and Nation. Yeah, I'm sorry about this, but my computer is about to burn my lap into flames. So anyways, goodbye.